Hello, everyone. You're watching Mayshad Choice weekly kickoff conversation. I'm Neza Alawi, founder and CEO of Mayshad, the New York-based company that empowers women on a daily basis. Today, I am with Jan Murserdam, our VP Development, and Dr. Risa Ryger, our clinical psychologist and investor at Mayshad Choice.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Neza. Hi, Risa. So happy to be with all of you again on this Monday afternoon. We know that this week in particular is a really very special, empowering, impactful weekend ahead of all of us, and excited to kick off the week with all of you. As I mentioned, we're Mayshad Choice, an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. We invite all of you to participate in our chat today. We have a very impactful, very meaningful conversation lined up for all of us. Please feel free to comment and visit us at joinmayshad.com to learn more about how you too can be corporate executives, entrepreneurs, and business owners, and look forward to sharing this afternoon with you. Thank you, Neza. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Jan. So I would like to say that we are off script today. Of course, we had a topic of nutrition that we're going to talk about, but we will get to it at some point when we receive our guest, Isabel Smith. But we would like to start with really speaking about everything that is going on, and we just cannot stay silent in front of the violence, the hatred that we have all been experiencing over the past week. So I would like to open with the quote from Nelson Mandela. "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to human heart than its opposite." With Dr. Ryger on a weekly basis, we really dig into the psychological aspect of topics. We went through episode after episode, going through the COVID pandemic. We went through the confinement. We went through the anxiety of working remotely or going back to work. Dr. Ryger, we're so blessed to have you. And my first question to you is really, how do we get there? How do we get to a point as a human being to commit an act of violence and be that reckless about it?
Neza, that is such a hard question to answer, and we can address it on so many different levels. We can address it from an intellectual level. We can address it from a theoretical level. And we need to address it from our hearts and from a human level. And there are ways that we have to do all both. This isn't a time for or, this is a time for and. And we need to put the pieces together, not only for ourselves, but we need to do that for ourselves and looking inward and asking ourselves whatever the questions are that we need to ask. I'm not saying that there are universal questions for each of us, but for whatever that is for you, to try to make sense of what's going on, to try to understand, to try to be in connection with yourself, to try to ask the questions perhaps about what our own unconscious biases may be. What are we carrying with us? What are we carrying with us that we may not be adequately aware of? And by the way, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but that being unaware is not an excuse. That being unaware, there are lots of things that we're unaware about. And so it is our imperative. It has to be our commitment to bring what we're not aware of into awareness. Because you can't change what you're not aware of or what you're inadequately aware of. And so there's a commitment and there's an energy. This is effortful. This doesn't happen in a passive, easy fashion. This happens in an effortful way. This is active. This is a commitment. This is a place where there's a moment where you have to reflect and wonder about, what have my thoughts been, let alone what have I been saying. And what I want to say is that, and I'm going to say, is that we cannot control our thoughts. We just can't. And so it's the nature of how people are, that someone can cut you off when you're driving and some thought about them comes into your mind, or whatever that may be. We cannot control our thoughts. And sometimes we can be frightened or really upset by the thoughts that may arise, right? And that can happen because we can't control them. However, what we can do is become more aware, see when it's happening, acknowledge when it's happening, acknowledge what are the undercurrents that we may have inside of ourselves. What is it that we may have grown up with? What is it that we may have just kind of gotten into our systems that through hearing from all different places? What is it that's inside of ourselves that we need to pay attention to? And we need to say, hey, I just had this thought, and what is this thought doing? What is it doing in terms of engraving certain information, certain ideas into my mind? And when we notice, and actually, Neza, I was at a financial meeting at a financial company, and the question was, well, what do we do about unconscious bias? Does anybody have an answer? And I raised my hand and I said, yes, it's your obligation. It's your imperative. It's your responsibility. It's your call to action. Step one, your call to action to become more aware and to commit yourself to that.
Thank you, Dr. Ryger. Racism is definitely an act of ignorance. We see that the more international you are, the more you get to live in cities like New York that have more diversity, and the more open you are to all races and religions. And we're often scared of other religions or races when we ignore everything about them. I'm going to continue with words of wisdom, and this is Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. We want this movement. We are all repulsed by what is happening, and how can we make sure that it doesn't go into another extreme of violence? You wanted to talk to us about unity and how do we get to the we. Can you tell us about it a little bit?
Well, one of the basic tenets of the country that we live in is that we are a diverse group. Go to Ellis Island. I don't know if any of you have ever taken the trip to Ellis Island, during the time that we were able to do that. And you you get on the ferry and you go across the water and you get to Ellis Island. I don't know why I'm choking up, but I am. It's just that time. And we see who has been welcomed in here. We see that. We see who has become part of the us. And it really becomes essential to understand and to be able to acknowledge and to be able to appreciate what people have contributed. And no one single person, no one single group helped build the country to what it became. It didn't come from one single group. this was an effort, a cross-cultural, a cross-racial, a cross-religious effort to build something that people were able to have a vision of together, that there was some sort of shared vision, whether people were the same, whether they had different kinds of ideas about it. But there was some kind of a shared vision that this could be a place where life could be better. Is that, are we all okay about that? That's why did people come? People came because there was some sort of vision, notion, hope. And I think hope is such a crucial word, that there is a hope for something better, a hope for what you could build, a hope for what you could do with yourself to have an impact for yourself, for your family, for being that person in the world. And so it's been an effort. It's been an and. We've been an and. We haven't been an or. And it's the and of who we are as human beings, of what each of us could contribute with our own talents, abilities, and opportunities. And I think opportunity is also a very important word here, because clearly there were people who did have opportunity and people who had much more limited opportunity or no opportunity. So let's just put that out there. But it was in this a vision that everyone had some kind of piece of it, or hopefully did, that people were able to come together and build something bigger and something that you could, be part of. Because it is supposed to be, if we go back to our basic words, it is supposed to be united. It is supposed to be united. And as human beings in this country, to find our path towards unity and to find our path towards connected humanity. It doesn't mean we all have to like each other, and it doesn't mean that we all have to agree with each other, but that there is a respect, a basic respect for humanity, that I don't know if there can be an argument about that, but how we get to we the people, how we get to some form of unity, because now as never before, it is so important that we are in unity to help get us through. This isn't a one-off, and this isn't something that's solved on a unitary basis.
Dr. Ryger, at Mayshad, we bring women together to network as a resource to each other, to get trained through workshop, but also we encourage them to be activists of the future, to be activists in society for all the inequalities that are out there. So my question to you is, as women from all races, from all religions, what is it that we can do to better the society? I feel that we have the role. I always talk about women as being the mothers of next generation. Again, whether they are mothers in their family or not, we've always had that role. And I have spent time in Africa, in small communities where the woman is always a leader because she's the one who will care back about her community. So what is it that we can do as women for the next generation?
There's you always ask these small, easy questions. I can't speak for all women, but I think that this is a time for women to think about, to think through for themselves what it is that they can do. And each of us, we don't have to do the same thing. but we can each do something. And so the way that you can contribute, the way that you can help, the way that you can make a change, a way that you can not to overuse the word, but to really be the change, right? Be part of the change. What does that look like? What is that? And so each of us has an opportunity to find a path for ourselves to contribute, to doing nothing is no longer really an option. Everyone can do something. And the one thing that you do, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, because this is building blocks. This is building blocks. And so in that way, I mean, I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of discussions. That discussions are already happening. But one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that having the discussions isn't enough. It's not. Speaking with people who are like-minded and agreeing that things are wrong or things need to be better or whatever is not enough. What we know and what we do know and what we need to commit to is not only having the discussion, but what does a step look like? How do you take the discussion to implementation?
Thank you, Risa. Risa, when we're looking at participating ourselves in some of the protests that are going on across the country right now, or watching it on TV, we're understanding that the protests themselves are incredibly diverse in the sense of who's showing up to lend support and advocacy and sharing of voices on this very incredibly difficult moment in time. And I'm wondering, for those of us who truly want to be a part of the solution, there's also a moment in time where, to the point of your conversation earlier about stepping back and understanding how implicit bias really affects all of us, right? And understanding the ways in which we become conscious of the prejudices and stereotypes that we've held in ourselves for many years, if not for centuries leading back to our ancestors. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the things that we can do for ourselves, even before we do for others, but what can we do for ourselves to understand the ways in which we may be playing a part of the problem that we have now today?
So the first part of that is to really, this is the time when there's the outside action, but there's also the inner work. And the inner work is really important, because the inner work, meaning when I say inner work, what I mean by that is what we need to do within ourselves. Part of this is an inside job. Part of this is asking the questions of, what comes into my mind when I see someone who's different? What is the fleeting thought that goes through? Do I have any physiological reaction at that time? Is there anything that's like kind of one of those like thoughts that just comes in that I don't pay too much attention to? So the first place to start is the inner work. And I don't mean, well, take a couple of months and do that. That's an ongoing process. And that's a start place. And then what do you do with that? How do you call that out? If you see an injustice, how do you deal with that? When you're in company, for example, with other people, and someone makes a snide remark, or the joke, or whatever that may be, how do you intervene? Do you let it just happen? Do you say something? Do you let people know that that's not okay with you? Is there a way of helping to bring other people in? Because we want this to be inclusive. And so, one of the things that I say, and you saw me in tears today, so I mean it. But one of the things that I say is that when you come to Mayshad, here we are together, and we're here in the sisterhood. And I welcome everyone who has chosen and made it possible for them to be here today now, or for those people who can't be here while we're live, but they're going to watch it afterwards. That when you come here, you are welcome with open arms. Open arms, period. That's it. You have a spot. If we go back to school, back to elementary school, we go back to middle school, like you've got a spot in the cafeteria. You've got a spot at a table. And taking that idea that you have a spot at the table, that you are welcome with open arms, that this is something that even with people who may not see things the way you might, or I might, or someone else might, but the person who's making the remark, I mean, the way that you go about addressing that, we want to, I would think, the purpose isn't only to say this is wrong, but that's an important part of the communication. But the question is, is it possible to be able to address it in a way that is more helping the person to come in rather than just pushing them away. And I think that's one of the harder pieces, is that we have to at first tolerate, just hearing something, but that's where our tolerance ends. Our tolerance doesn't go with, well, I'm just going to let it pass. Because that, at what point do we go from tolerance to complicity?
Mm-hmm.
And how much does it take to just flip it over?
Risa, it's really interesting what you're saying too, because there's the individual part of this, right? Where this is a moment in time for all of us to do a lot of deep reflection on the ways in which we just show up, right? We show up for the world. And then as we lead as managers, business owners, entrepreneurs, corporate executives, there's also the ways in which we show up for our company and for our teams. And encouraging and being a part of different solutions where we're not just hiring people who look like us, or we're not just sitting next to the same people at the cafeteria every day because we think that we have something in common with them, or really being a champion for change and really including people of color and women and other traditionally marginalized groups in decision-making roles and responsibilities. And that's a seismic shift, because in this country we have decades, if not centuries, of institutionalized racism that impacts us economically, politically, and socially and culturally. And that's a lot to take on, right? Particularly in a pandemic. But what a great moment in time right now, if there's something positive that's happening about now. We think back to the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, which was also a period of tremendous transformation and tremendous change in this country, is now a similar moment in time to be able to rise to action in a different way, where maybe we're pushed to the limit now and something positive can come from it. And do you think that could be this moment in time, given everything else that's happening in our society right now?
Well, I really have two words to answer that with. Why not? Why not? Why not now? It's happening now. It's been happening. Why not now? And I'm sorry, and just going back to what you're saying about sitting with people who are like us. Well, I'm so glad you said that, because this is an opportunity to also start defining for yourself, in not only intellectual but in very heartfelt ways, what does commonality mean? What does commonality look like? What is it that has us feeling that there's a lot of division between us? I mean, and so we can start to, and it has already started, to start asking ourselves the questions of, how do we define commonality? I mean, here we are. I'm blonde, you're redhead, get two brunettes here. One, Isabel has you will have the pleasure of meeting her shortly, slightly darker hair. I mean, how do we define commonality? I know I'm making a very, very, banal point here, but in some ways it is, and in some ways it's not.
Well, Dr. Ryger, we also had panelists, women who are Black American women, and talk to us about the different levels and shades within their communities, or women that are Latinas. Or I also like to remind that I am African, I am Muslim, I am Arab woman, and if you look at the stereotypes of those races, I definitely do not look or feel or sound like one of those stereotypes. And so, because you would think of a Muslim woman as a woman who has her head covered and who is completely conservative, or you would think as an African woman who's a woman with a darker skin color, and so I personally think that the us that you're talking about has always been like-minded people who share your values, rather than people who are part of a community. And so the other point, when you were talking, Dr. Ryger, that you talked about that is so important, it's our power to influence. And I think that if we cannot solve everything in today's show, and no one in reality, is there one woman or one man in the world that can change 100 years of history, that can just change a systemic discrepancy overnight? Yes, definitely the leaders can help with that process, and can certainly not act in a process of denial. But no one can change things overnight, but we can all change things slowly. We all have a level of influence in our family, in our teams, in our building, in our community, in our area. And so I think that's the important thing also to remind people today, is that what is happening is a reminder of the discrepancies that are still out there in terms of inequalities in the system. And we are all part of that system. So we should all move forward, being more conscious of creating that change at all levels.
And I'll add to what you're saying, Nessa, in that we are different. And we do not have to be the same. And we are not going to be the same, period. However, to keep in mind, because it can be, I mean, in terms of unconscious bias, just a thought to share, as I see the three of you here on my screen, that different does not mean less than. And in some ways, we celebrate difference because in difference, there's richness. In difference, there's texture. In difference, there's the rainbow. In difference, there's something that can happen that can't happen in other ways. But let's not confuse different with less than. And if we can also start to remember that we can't all be the same, we are not all the same, and we shouldn't be all the same. That is not the requirement for entry, for full entry anywhere, is for everyone to be the same. The truth in feeling and the truth in action is that there's the celebration of differences, and different doesn't mean less than.
Risa, so many of these times we look for inspirational leadership. Neza, you read some incredibly powerful quotes earlier. And I think, so many of us right now are looking for that sense of leadership as well, knowing that right now, for many of us, it may not come at the national level. And so how can we ensure that we're being true leaders in our own communities, in our own ecosystems, and standing up for what is right and true and just, knowing that we might not have a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa or another historically well-received public figure to look up to, at least for right now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back and think about I'm going to share with you the thought that came to my mind. And this is on a very, very mundane, again, level, is that when my girls were growing up, they both played soccer, and one of them was on a soccer team where there was a really, really good goalie, and she left the team, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we don't have a goalie. What are we going to do? We're sunk." And what happened was that one of the girls on the team just rose from the ranks and became an amazing goalie. So the thing is that we don't know. We can't know where that person is or where those people are. And they could be here right now. And, it depends what we're looking for. But there are many people speaking out. There are many people on their feet. There are many people who are looking to take action and committed to doing that. And so there's, for us who are looking to help make things better, there's some of that in each and every one of us. And it is our imperative to connect with that part of who we are. And we may not lead nationally, right? We may not lead internationally, but wherever you are, you can have impact and you can connect with that aspect of leadership and move it forward.
Dr. Ryger, I would like us to speak about mourning. Okay, we are all mourning an act of crime against humanity. And sometimes the dead person is not in our family, but we have as much the right to mourn that crime, because when it's a crime against humanity, today the entire country is united in mourning George Floyd. Could you tell us about that, when the act of mourning and the act of not being able to feel legitimate to mourn as much as other families because we don't belong to that immediate family of the crime?
Well, our mourning is not going to be the same. It's not going to happen on the same level. It's not going to happen in the same kind of way. We don't share the memories of that family. We don't share the memories of how this little boy was growing up and what he did that was really sweet and cute and perhaps, these sweet moments and memories. We don't have that. We don't know that. We're not going to be able to mourn in that way. We can't grieve the way this family is grieving. At the same time, we also can feel profound distress, upset. And please, everyone, please forgive me straight out, because whatever the words I'm using now are not going to be adequate, and in some ways they're not going to fully embrace what really needs to be embraced right now. So please bear with me on this. But we still through our compassion, through our caring, through our ability to love beyond ourselves, to our ability to love and to care and to feel compassion beyond those people in our own families, or those people we know by name, or those people we've shared coffee with or have had life experiences with. If it's within our souls, within our hearts, to be able to have compassion and mourn, because these human being, and we can mourn, and it's not the same. It's not the same though, but that doesn't make it not legitimate.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ryger. Isabel is joining us, and Isabel is going to speak to us about nutrition. And Dr. Ryger, can I let you introduce Isabel?
It is my pleasure, and I'm so thankful to have Isabel here today, particularly on this day when we're so emotionally challenged in trying to wrap our heads around what's going on and what we can do, each of us, and perhaps each of us together. So I'm just really thrilled to have Isabel here today to share her wisdom. And without further ado, let me introduce her. So Isabel Smith, MSRD, CDN, founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition, is a nationally recognized integrative registered dietitian, health and lifestyle expert, as well as a certified level 2 Reiki practitioner. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Isabel sits on the expert advisory board of Eat This, Not That, and Embody 360. Her expert opinion is often featured in print and online and can be found in Elle, Mind Body Green, Reader's Digest, Women's Health, Men's Health, and others. As an advisor, consultant, and brand ambassador for various food and health-minded brands, she has worked with Anheuser-Busch, Kind, Beata Juice, Caesar Stone, and Liebherr Appliances, to name a few. And without further ado, Isabel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, listening in as a member and having a spot in this community. And so we begin.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
It's wonderful to be here on a really hard day and a really hard moment. And thank you for having me.
So I'm going to, if it's okay with Neza and Jan, I'll kick off a question that that we're in a lot of stress right now. We're in a lot of stress. We're in a lot of heartache and worry. And certainly, and there are, in addition to that, there are also the tremendous health issues that are all around us, the new ones and the ones that we've carried in ourselves even prior to the pandemic. Now, with all of this additional stress, as I mentioned before we were on the air, I mean, I could sit down and go twirl by twirl, start with a bowl of spaghetti, move to a sleeve of cookies, and for the third act, go spoon by spoon into some ice cream. And I was like half joking, and I said, like, why is it that when we're stressed, it's not like, oh, I'm feeling really stressed, I think I'll go eat an orange. So part of the question, I know I'm being a little lighthearted here, is that through times of stress, right? Yeah. Could you help us understand a little bit more, like why we might go towards that direction, and and ways that you can kind of help us help ourselves?
For sure. No, and this is something that I've been talking all day and I don't know, the last 3 months with my clients, and a topic that is very relevant all the time, food and stress, and then also doubt about our choices and, discouraging words towards ourselves because of the choices we make. It's always a very relevant conversation. And I think most importantly, no matter what you're putting in your mouth, be compassionate with yourself at the moment, especially, I think. Yes, we can certainly make better choices, and we probably should, because it does help. But I also want to instill upon everybody watching and everybody listening that you also need to be kind and gentle and compassionate to yourself about the things that you need, want, and desire. As you know, Dr. Ryger, the brain is incredibly powerful, right? And so especially when we are needing those feel-good hormones, serotonin and dopamine, and a moment of high and connection to others that we can't find at the moment, our brain knows that we reach for something that's high carb, high sugar, more processed, and the pleasure center lights up. And that feels good, right? And that feels good, and it's nourishing in a certain regard, and we want more of it. And so we dive right in. And while there is certainly, connection to the pleasure center and mood boosting chemicals, there's also the same when it comes to making choices that are slightly more nutritious for your brain and your body. I think right now it's a balance. I think it's always a balance, but particularly right now. And I do think that the formula is really compassion and love for yourself and for others, as well as for the choices that you're making. Knowing that, you're going to go for something that's more sugary or whatever, because it's going to light your brain up on fire with pleasure and joy for a moment or two. It's not going to be long lasting, because that reaction does not linger for very long. So things that actually would help you sustain that response might be choosing, like, for example, dark chocolate. Hits my buttons in a lot of different ways, but it also has a ton of nutrients that can sustain the anti-inflammatory, mood boosting components. So, that's something I like to consider when people are asking me these kinds of questions. Long-winded answer.
I have a question for you, Isabel. So,
Sure.
Culturally, food is a big thing, right? And we think about the ways in which food unites people and brings people together, whether it be family outings or birthdays or anniversaries or parties or whatever that is. And so we know that this is a part of our history, right? And I'm wondering, as we're thinking through the conversation with Risa today, that, from your perspective, how could food be used to build the divides that we now often experience as it pertains to cultures and just society in general? And given the fact that we're still technically all self-isolating still, are there ways in which that can be used to build the bridge between how we think about what comes next?
For sure. And I think that's a really important consideration, because I think, especially in moments of stress, we forget the important role that food has in more than just self-soothing. It is a form of connection. From the time a baby is born, the mother shows the baby love by providing food. And, we all gather around food when we are together for celebrations and for various different parts of our cultural existence, right? So what's hard, particularly right now when we want to gather together, is that we can't really, especially if you're here in New York. But it doesn't mean you can't still practice cultural food practices at a distance. If it's safe and you're with people who you've been quarantining for a while, if you're in a location like I am here and like Dr. Ryger is, you should make a moment, a few moments, a lot of moments, have some meals together, connect over food. And if you can't physically together, do it over Zoom or Skype. I think it's a great point that just because we can't physically be together doesn't mean that we can't have a meal together. I've done it with, my family, and I had dinner with my parents on Zoom a couple weeks ago. And it's not perfect, but it's something. And I think it can instill a little bit of normalcy and connection. I think connection is especially important right now. And I think we can use food to do that. It's a great point. And I think we should.
Isabel, we're all right now worried about our immune system. That's what makes us more resilient or less to the virus and the pandemic. Are there certain nutrients that we escaped from through the confinement without realizing it? And are there other nutrients and foods that you advise us to insist on to boost our immune system?
For sure. I think I've noticed that it's changed a bit in the past couple of weeks, but especially at first, I think that most people were leaning towards packaged foods and shelf foods and, freezer foods. And our bodies need fresh produce. Nobody was buying fresh produce. You walked into a supermarket here in New York and all the shelves were empty, but the produce was full, right? The fresh produce was full because nobody was buying it. One of the most important components for immune system is the gut bacteria. You've probably heard of probiotics and the microbiome, and they really feed off of fiber and nutrients from fresh food. And there was fear for a while that consuming raw uncooked food, you might get coronavirus, but that has definitely since been thrown away. And we all need more produce. It's important for our gut bacteria, and the stress of what's happening is one of the quickest ways to kill healthy bacteria that lives in our gut. Nutrients like many of the minerals that come in any fruits and vegetables, like magnesium and manganese, they're all important for antioxidant and immune system function and reactions in the body. B vitamins, like those that are found in some produce, but also in lean animal meats, really important for our brain and our immune system, but also our energy. But if I had to pick one category of food that I would say is the thing, anything fresh, fruits or vegetables, all of it is good. We're coming into season where people may be growing it too in their backyard, or they can go to a farmer's market. Whatever you can get your hands on, just get your hands on it. It's all good.
Thank you, Isabel. We really do expect a nutritionist to speak to us about vitamins and nutrients, but we do forget about bacteria and probiotic, and thank you for reminding us. It is, and I think especially in those times when you're fighting a virus scare or a virus that you could have had on a mild way, the fact that you have those bacteria, they're the ones that can compete with the bad bacteria.
They're so important, and I think the most important thing about the bacteria is actually feeding it. And that's the part we miss the most. I find people are very quick to take probiotics, and there are so many kinds, and yogurt and kefir and blah, blah, blah. But then we don't feed the bacteria. And like a garden, if you don't feed it, it doesn't grow. And so that's like prebiotics and just vegetables and fruits in general. The fiber is what feeds the bacteria. And so some of my favorites are like oats and almonds and asparagus. If you just Google prebiotics, you'll get the whole list. But the food is more important, I think, than the actual addition of the new bacteria, because it makes it grow and it makes it live, and we keep them alive in there, which is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Isabel, I have a question for you that actually links to a point in the conversation that Risa was making earlier as well. And this is something we wanted to talk about originally, is the theme of body image. And particularly for women, the complex nature with which we experience with our own bodies over time. And, Risa, going back to what you were saying around just self-love and self-care, I know we've talked about this for, for many of our shows now, but wondering, in this particular moment in time where there's so much happening for us socially, politically, economically, how does body image, in the way in which we think others see us and how we see ourselves, factor into this conversation now that we're also having about race and the state of race relations in the U.S.?
Is that a question for me or Risa?
Sure, yes. Isabel, we'll start with you if you want to speak, and then Risa, feel free to chime in too.
Dr. Ryger, you want to go first?
No.
Okay. I think that the conversation about body image is really complicated at the moment. It's always complicated, especially for women, right? But I think especially right now, because we're in this weird moment of, we've been inside for months. I wear leggings every day. They're cute, but I wear them. And I'm like, I think our normalcy has been disrupted. So not only that, but we're not in our usual routine. Our movement has been affected. The stress is involved. And I'm feeling that a lot of my female clients, the stress of everything is plopping right into the body image, right? So not only are we feeling like everything is different and our choices are different and our movement's not the same and we're stressed. So for women in particular, men too, this is not just for women, it's men as well. I think people are being really hard on themselves. I'm finding that, there's a lot more criticism. I think that it's a serious point of stress. My response to it is have some love and compassion for yourself at the moment. It's the only way to get through this. Yes, the way your body looks and the way we feel about the body is so important, but right now we need to love it because it's surviving this thing and allowing us to be where we are. And I just want to encourage love for it. It's a very complex being, and it's complex to be inside one of these bodies always, but I think especially right now.
Isabel, what you bring to bear, I think, is really important just for how we find a greater level of self-love and acceptance for ourselves. And then doesn't that in a way then also pose the possibility that we have greater self-acceptance and love for others, which Risa is exactly what the point of our conversation is today, right? Around how do we start to open our minds and our hearts to not just embrace difference and diversity, but to actually think about together, how do we create opportunities for more humanity and for those more humane moments where we're actually treating each other, Isabel, to exactly to your points, and what you're advocating for that we do for ourselves, we do for others.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've done, I'm trying to remember if it was the last show or the show before that, where we did a kindness meditation. And so we started with bringing kindness to ourselves, kindness to our friends, our families, but then also our next step was to send and to bring kindness to a stranger, to someone that we don't know well. And to your, very much to your point and to your question, Jan, that the commitment of, basically put your oxygen mask on first, that you need to be able to truly bring compassion, is that you need to be able to bring compassion to maybe the hardest person that there is to bring compassion to, which sometimes for women is yourself.
Yeah.
And so once you can bring compassion to yourself, whether you're feeling worthy of it at the moment or not, and it's especially when you're not feeling so worthy of it, that it's even more important to bring it.
Yeah.
And that way we're really able to transcend and understand that compassion isn't just when, kind of you're in the mood or it's okay, but compassion is something that you need to really try to dip into, even when it's hard.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think sometimes as women and men, but as women, I think we have a dialogue, or I I hear it, I see it from my clients. We have a dialogue of really nasty things that we say to ourselves that I don't think we would ever say to anybody else, ever. And maybe you would, but generally I don't think you would. And I think we also forget that our bodies hear us. So the things that we say to ourselves, our bodies are listening. You know, the chemical reaction that goes off in our bodies when we say these things to ourselves, it's massive. So when you start to get angry at yourself and say these horrible things, a whole stream of chemicals and cortisol and stress hormones are released. And if we say that to ourselves over and over again, can you imagine what's happening inside of our bodies? It's the opposite of what you want when you're trying to tell yourself that you're whatever, you know, and that you want it to get better. You're actually making it much harder for your body to do what you want it to.
And so I'm going to propose, not necessarily the next show, but that one of the shows, we're going to talk about perfect and perfection.
Yeah, a good one.
We're getting to the end of this show already. Dr. Ryger, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to talk about great topics every week. And Isabel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And hopping off. And thank you all for just joining and getting completely off script and sharing with our audience all of your feelings regarding the current situation that we're going through. And thank you for giving us your tips on nutrition. You will be able to see us next week with Dr. Ryger. And Jan, would you like to close?
Sure, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us each and every week. And please, we have a really interesting conversation coming up tomorrow in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion show at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the conversation is on implicit bias. So we encourage all of you to stay connected and join us for that conversation. We have Workshop Wednesday coming up on Wednesday. I almost said on Monday, on Wednesday. And we have our Women in Money show at 11 o'clock each and every Thursday, again, Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much. And please just know that from the bottom of our hearts that Neza and I and the team and Risa and David and Sarah and Hasna and everyone else who's a part of the Mayshad family really do extend all of our love out to each and every one of you. We couldn't do this without you, and you're very, very important to us, and can't wait for you to share the upcoming week with us. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon.